friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Little Woodland Library, Let's Go Nuts, Crazy Antics, Heart Tree, and Little Woodland Library add-on. So I've stamped those images on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with my squirrels, and I'm going to make them red squirrels today since that is my favorite animal in the whole wide world. So I am using E13, E15, E17, and E18. And I'm going to start by laying in my shadows with that E18. And because they're pretty small and they're fairly close together, I'm just going to go ahead and do my shadows for all of these little guys at once. So I'm going to continue doing it on the left-hand side for the next little squirrel. I'll switch to the right-hand side for the baby squirrel since he's facing toward the left. And again with the squirrel with his hands in the air, which Lawn Fawn likes to call the yay squirrel because it looks like he's cheering. I will also do my shadows on the right since he's facing toward the left. That way their faces stay nice and highlighted so you can really make out their features. Then I'll come in with my next shade, which is going to be the E17. And I will be predominantly using the darkest three shades for their bodies with just a little touch of that E13, which we'll get to in a minute. But I'll start adding in this mid-tone on each of these little squirrels, just pulling that darkest color into the mid-tone by going over the edge of it so that I break up the line of that color and create a nice smooth blend. I've mentioned this before, but one of my favorite YouTube channels to watch is Danny Connor Wild. She is a wildlife photographer and she is based out of Sweden. She's actually from the UK, but she has a house in Sweden in a place called the Squirrel Forest where there are a lot of red squirrels. And she recently did a video series where she rescued 3 baby squirrels and rehabilitated them and then released them back into the wild, and it was just an incredible series. If you're at all interested in wildlife, I definitely recommend that you go and check that out. So now I've moved on to my E15 and I am mainly filling in my little squirrels. I'm going to use that E13 on their muzzles and their bellies. So any place that would be more solid, like their arms, legs, tail, top of their head, I only used those darkest 3 shades for. Then I'll bring in that E13 and kind of bring that into that white area. I am leaving a little bit of white space around their muzzles, and I will also color in their feet with that E13, but I realized that I wanted to go just a little bit lighter, so I am also going to bring in the E11 and bring that even closer on their muzzles and fill in their bellies with that shade, especially for the yay squirrel because we see so much of his belly. Then I'm going to give these little squirrels some rosy cheeks using R20 and R22. I'm going to add a little R22 to the cheek area. Since they are so dark already, I am going to just soften that with the R20 so that kind of blends into the rest of the fur, but then I will go back with a second layer of that R22 to just darken that up a little bit more. Next, I'm going to work on my tree, and I'm going to use E21, E23, E25, and E27. And I'm going to start with my E27 and lay in some shadows on the outside edges of the tree. I'll also put them on the underside of the roots that are showing above ground. And each of the branches I'm going to add a bit of that darkness to as well so that we get a lot of dimension. And then once I have that laid in, I will also color in the pole of the Little Free Library with these shades. So I'm going to start with that E27 and add a little bit of shadow on the right hand side and up underneath that little free library. And then I'm going to start blending out with my midtone, which is going to be the E25. Again, just making sure I go over the edge of that darkest shade and break up that harsh line so that I get a nice blend. Of course, the blend doesn't have to be perfect on wood grain because there is a lot of texture to that naturally, but I still like to smooth things out as much as possible. I will also add a little bit of shading with that E25 to the heart that is carved into the tree. And then I will come in with the E23, which is going to be my lightest for the tree. I will save that E21 for that heart cutout to finish that off, so that's just a little bit lighter. But the rest of the tree I'm going to fill in with that E23, just finishing up those last highest branches, and then adding that to the pole of the little free library. And then I'll bring in that final shade, the E21, and just blend that on to the heart cut out. You can also stamp things into that little heart if you want to. I didn't for this card, but I have in the past, and it's a really cute look. I also finished off the little free library, and now I am going to do my acorn tops. So I'm going to use E27, E25, and E23 for the caps of my acorns. And I did do a few extra of these on a separate sheet because I didn't know how many I was going to want. I think I did 7 in total. And then for the nut of the acorn, I'm going to use E23 as my shadow, and then blend out with the E21, filling up about half of that nut. And then I'll bring in E00 for my highlight and just fill the rest of that in. And that's a really nice transition from that E21. I kept just those lightest 3 shades, the same shades that I used for the nut of my acorn, and I'm going to use those for the structure of my little free library. So I'm going to add a little bit of depth to the outside edges with that E23, and then I'll start to blend that out with the E21, especially up under that roof line. I want there to be a nice deep shadow there. And then I'll fill in with the E00. And then I wanted that to look like there was some wood grain texture to it. So I'm going to go back with that E23 and just add some little lines and whorls, some little loops and things, just very lightly with the tip of that marker so that it adds that little bit of texture that kind of mimics what we've got going on in the tree. And then I wanted that to be on the pole as well, so I'll go back to my E27 and just add that in with that shade so that it stands out on that darker wood. And then I'm going to keep that E00 and add in E000, and I will use these 2 shades for the pages of my book on any of the ones that are open or that you can see from the side. And then I'm going to switch to my first green tone, which is going to be YG41 and YG45. And I'm going to do some of the leaves on my tree with this. So I'm kind of picking and choosing which ones to do. I'm going to end up doing 3 different shades of leaves. So just choosing different ones that I want to be in this kind of cooler, more sea green type shade. So I'm adding in that YG45 and then blending out with the YG41. And I really, really love the tone of these 2 shades together. I think they're really soft and lovely and very underrated Copic colors. I don't see a lot of people using them, but I think they're gorgeous. And then once I have that done, I'm going to go back in with that YG45 and just add a little extra depth since it was only a 2 color combo. But I don't have a 3rd shade that really goes naturally well with these, so I'm just doubling up on the darker shade. I'm also going to pick a few of these accessories to do with these tones. So I chose one of the books in the little free library and one of the books in the stack. I'll do one of the single books also. I'm going to do the smaller of the two. The one that I stamped the title into is actually from the Little Woodland Library add-on, and this smaller one is from the Little Woodland Library. So the larger one is the one that fits the different titles, so that's why I stamped it into that one there. And then I also wanted to have like a multicolored quilt, so I added a few squares of that green combo in there as well. Next, I'm going to switch to a different green. I'm going to use G21, G24, and G28. That G28 is going to be nice and dark. It's going to provide a lot of contrast in this color palette. So I am again just picking and choosing a few of the leaves that I want to have in this darker color combo. I'm also going to do the 3 little grasses. Those are from the Little Woodland Library stamp set. And I just stamped them down 3 times so that I would have a few to spread throughout my scene. And I am going to blend out that G28 with the G24. Always making sure to go over the edge of that darkest shade, especially when there's a big jump between shades, so that we smooth out that transition and don't get like just like a messy blend. And then I'll add that to the grasses as well, and then come in with the highlight shade, which is going to be the G21, and fill in the rest of those leaves. I will also add that to the tips of the grasses so that they have a nice highlight where the sun would be hitting them the most. And then I wanted to use these for the roof of my little free library as well. I wanted it to look like something that was really integrated into the forest. That's why I went with the wood grain structure and then the green roof. It kind of mimics the tree that way. So I just used the G28 and the G24 for the roof because it's such a thin little area. And then I also used that for the little frame around the window on the little free library so that the roof and the frame match. And then of course I had to add that to one of the books. So I'm actually going to do the details on the bottom book with this combo. And I'll do the other areas of that book in a contrasting shade in just a minute. But I'm going to switch then. I'll keep the G24 and G21 and add in the G20, which has more of a yellow tone to it. So it's going to really brighten up the tree with the leaves. I'll add the G24 to the base of each of those, blend out with the G21, and then I'll add in that G20, which has a really lovely, almost translucence to it that I just really love. So I'm going to finish off my tree with this combo. I'll also add it to some of the squares on my quilt. That is from Crazy Antics. And I didn't add the darkest green into the quilt because I just wanted it to look like something that had been washed a bunch of times and was a little bit soft and maybe faded. So I didn't use the darkest green on that quilt, but I did use the other 2 greens. I'm going to do another book inside the little free library. And then I was trying to decide what color the background in the little free library should be, like the inner walls. And I decided that the lightest green would look good in there. So I went ahead and added that. And then I added just a touch of the G21 up at the top for a bit of shadow and blended back out with the G20. And then I'll also add these 3 shades to the bottom book in the stack so that we have the lightest green combo contrasting with the darkest green combo. And then I'm going to switch to some blue tones. I'm going to use B00, B01, and B02. I'm adding that to a few more of the books. I put it on the details on the top book in the stack. I'm also going to do that for the larger single book that says, "If you give a squirrel a nut." There's a bunch of different titles that you can stamp in there, but that one I thought just worked really appropriately with this scene. And then, of course, add some more patches to my quilt. So I added the B02 on the left, blended toward the right with the B01, and then used the B00 for the highlight to fill in those little squares. And then I'm also going to finish off that If You Give the Squirrel a Nut book. I didn't finish that off, and the other two books as well. And then I am going to switch to a little bit more desaturated blue combo. I'm going to use B00, B41, and B52. And I'll pick a few more squares in my quilt to color with this combo. I'm also going to do another book in the little free library and just blend out the B52 with the B41. And then I'll use that B00 for the highlight. I'll finish off the book inside the little free library, add a little bit of color to the glasses with the lightest two shades, and then also color the book on the top of the stack so that we have that nice contrast with the two tones of blue on there. And then my final combo is going to be a blue-violet, and I went with BV01, BV02, and BV04. I'll do all of the rest of the squares on my quilt. Again, starting on the left with the darkest shade, that BV04. I'll add that to the book that is in the little squirrel's hands. I'm going to color in my butterfly and finish off the last two books in the little free library and in the book stack. I'll blend out the BV04 with the BV02. And I really love how this color combo just came together. I wanted something that was very cool toned for today, contrasting with the warm tones of the tree and the squirrels and the acorns. So I just thought that that would be a fun combo that I don't think I've used in a long time, if ever. So that's what I decided to go for today. So I'm just going to finish off these last few little items with that BV01. I was going to bring in a gray for the knob on the little free library, but decided to just do it with the blue violets. And then I did forget to color in the Yay Squirrel's mouth, so I did that, and then trimmed all these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I am going to create a stenciled background. So for the sky, I'm using the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil and some Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink. I want that sky to be just a little bit darker though, a little bit moodier. So I am going to also bring in some faded jeans and then go back to my Tumbled Glass ink blending tool and just smooth that out so we only get a hint of that darker color. But I do really think it provides a nice bit of contrast that I really liked. So I'm going to keep working my way down this panel and turning that stencil until I get a different cloud formation, even flipping it over if necessary. I like the largest kind of hump of the cloud to be staggered across as we go down. So just working my way down, I'm doing 3 of these cloud formations, and then I will add just a touch of that tumbled glass to the bottom cloud so that it's not so stark white. And then I'm going to bring in my second stencil, which is going to be the grassy stencil, slimline grassy stencil from Lawn Fawn. And I'm going to place that right at the bottom of that third cloud. And then I'm going to bring in my greens. The first shade that I'm using is Rustic Wilderness. And I'm just really trying to blend that into the little gaps in the stencil so that we get some nice crisp looking grass. So I'm building up that color, making sure to make that dark enough. And then I will blend out with one shade lighter, which is the Mowed Lawn. Just adding in that color to fill in the rest of the white space, and then also working over the transition between this and the Rustic Wilderness. And I will go back and forth a bit between these two shades, just to try to smooth that out a little bit more. The more ink you have on there, the better the blend. So just working my way back and forth until I'm happy with it. And then once I am, I'll remove that stencil, and I want to do a little bit of splatter to add some interest to the background. And I'm going to use my darkest two shades for that today. So I'm going to use the Rustic Wilderness and the Faded Jeans, and I'm going to add a spritz of water to each of those. I'll mix that up with a thin paintbrush, and I'll splatter that on the sky for the Faded Jeans. And then I'll go right into the Rustic Wilderness for the grass. And then I'm going to set this panel aside to dry completely. Once it has, I've trimmed that down with the largest of the Lawn Fawn outside in stitch rectangle stackables. And I'm going to stamp my sentiment in the top left corner using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And I'm doing the sentiment that says, "I hope your day is literally the best." And I'm going to stamp that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold. And then I'll set this panel aside to dry again. I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Moonstone cardstock. And I'm going to stamp in Forget Me Not ink. And I'm going to do the book stack and the phrase, "You are tops in my book." And again, I'm going to stamp that down twice. And then I'm going to take one of the squirrels from Let's Go Nuts and just place that on top of the book stack, ink that up, and stamp that down so that it looks like he's sitting on top of it. And I stamped that down twice so that the ink was the same consistency. Now I'm ready to assemble my card, so I'm going to take my background and glue that to the front of my A2 standard size card base. So it's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall, and because I use that outside in die to trim it down, we get just a little bit of that moonstone cardstock border showing through on all the sides, which kind of frames it up really nicely. Then I'll bring in my images and start to stage the scene here. I'm going to add my tree first because that really does nestle into that sentiment. So I'm just going to place that where I want it and kind of slide it around while that glue is still wet. You don't have very long with this glue. It dries very quickly. So I'll just work as quick as I can until I have that just where I want it. And then to balance that out, I'm going to have the little free library over on the left side. Now I did move it over a little bit too far to the left from my initial design, which I will realize right here as I go to add the squirrel on top, this little running squirrel. I decided to make it look like he was laying on top of the roof. But then I realized that his tail was going to hang way too far over the edge of the card. So I had to position him a little bit differently than I had intended because that glue was already dry on the little free library and I could not shift it. It really does dry that fast. But I'll add a little book to his hand so it looks like he is kind of laying on top of the roof reading. And he's not laying like with the angle of the roof, but I still think it looks pretty cute. I'm going to add the yay squirrel down there just as a placeholder. He is not glued down there yet, but I wanted to have him there so that I know where to position my quilt. And then on that quilt, I'm going to add the reading squirrel. And then I'm going to have the baby squirrel listening to the story. And I actually stamped and colored 2 of those baby squirrels. So one of them I gave a little bit less white on the muzzle just so they look a bit different. But I forgot to do the rosy cheek on the second one, so I'm just going to quickly fill that in. And then I'm going to add these little baby squirrels so that it looks like they're sitting on that blanket and listening to the story time. Maybe that's one of their older siblings that's reading to them. So just figuring out the placement so that I'm not overlapping them too much. And then I had to shift the reading squirrel just a little bit to make it work. So I did have to kind of peel him up, which tore a little bit of the paper, but thankfully only a little bit of movement was necessary to get him shifted, and so it still covered everything back up. The stack of books, I was just trying to figure out where I wanted to have that. Originally I had it underneath the Yay Squirrel, but I just wanted to test it over by the Little Free Library in case. But I did decide to have him standing on that book stack. And then I'm going to give him the If You Give the Squirrel a Nut book in his hand, because that seems like something a squirrel would get excited about finding in the Little Free Library. So I am going to start filling in the scene with the accessory images now with the little grasses. I'm going to put one down at the base of the Little Free Library, and was just figuring out exactly where I wanted that. I decided to shift it a little bit more toward the left for some balance, and then I'll have another one at the base of the stack of books shifted toward the right, and then that final little patch of grass is going to go over by the quilt so that we have a little visual triangle there. And then I've got the glasses that I'm going to place on the edge of the quilt. And then all of these little acorns I'm going to start just filling in the scene with, adding some here and there and putting them at different angles so that it looks like they've kind of just fallen down on the ground and are collecting there. So I love how this card just combines two of my most favorite things. I'm a huge reader. If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you probably know that. I love to read. And I also love red squirrels. So I thought it would be fun to kind of combine those two interests on this one little scene. And it was a really fun one to put together. So I am going to finish with what I thought was my last acorn. I didn't realize that there was one hiding in my little dish underneath the butterfly, so I will end up adding that one as well, but just putting in this second to last one first and kind of overlapping it. I put two together to kind of balance the two down at the bottom right. And then I was just trying to decide where that butterfly would look the best. But I decided to put it up at the top right corner, so it kind of balances out the purple book at the bottom left corner. And then there I found my last little acorn, so I'm going to add that over on the left-hand side as well, near that little patch of grass. And of course, a card that combines some of my favorite things has to also feature my favorite embellishment, which is Stardust Stickles. So I'm going to add a little bit of glitter to my butterfly's wings and my glasses. And then I also decided to add it to the caps on my acorns, since they would normally be textured anyway. And I put it on the knob of the Little Free Library, and then on the details on the books that are in the book stack. And then I just decided to add some to the Little Free Library books as well. I just picked two in there. And that is going to finish off this card. So I will lift that up so you can see all of the details. And I'll give you another peek at the inside of the card. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. Let me know what your favorite animal and your favorite hobby is, and if you have ever combined them on a card. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. The products I use will all be linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are two videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.